Hello and welcome to the boat nook. Today I'm working on the interior of a Sailmaster 22 sailboat. Working on this one, trying to not spend much money on it. It was a free boat and it needs a lot, so I just need to be careful what I put into it. So I'm trying to reuse some materials that I've got on hand, as always, but even more so on this boat. And also just going to try to reuse what I can on the boat itself. Merry Christmas, everybody. Hope you all have a safe and blessed holiday. Thanks for watching. Well, I got the ice box out, and it only had 5/8 inch, maybe 3/4 inch insulation around it. It was made with like a liner material, the whole thing. It was made decent, it's just no insulation around it, so that's why I prefer just a more modern day cooler. But what has happened whenever I took the sink loose and I dropped the water line from the faucet down low in the bilge, it created a siphon, and the siphon in the water that was in the holding tank out. Not holding tank, but the fresh water tank. There's about a 10 or 12 gallon, 13 gallon fresh water tank built in up in front of the compression post up there that's glassed into the hull. Evidently it was full of water, so I'm going to go ahead and let it drain into the bilge, and then I'll pump it out of the bilge. I didn't really know there was any water in it, but evidently there was. So I've got the cabinet countertop out, and the ice box out, and I'm in the process of removing this panel here, which I hope I can reuse it. I think it's okay to remake this other panel. And then this panel that came out from here, I recut it to fit back where this one came out. This panel was too far gone. It was rotten. The whole bottom third of it was pretty rotten from rainwater. I took that panel and made a replacement panel for that starboard side. That's just dry fitted in. I've got to sand it and straighten out that front edge a little bit, and put the little groove in it for the black plastic edge stripping, edge banding. That panel that I replaced that starboard panel with, it was in good shape. One corner was just a tiny bit soft right at the very edge. I'm going to take and saturate it with some thinned encapsulating epoxy on that, the cut edge, salt edge. But I'm going to sand those panels down, clean them up really good. At least the edges will be saturated in epoxy. That really opens the boat up, gives me a lot more area, just to be able to sit down and relax inside if it's raining or whatever. And then that still leaves the V-berth basically like it was. So I took that one out, but it was still enough of it there to use as a pattern. So I used it as a pattern to recut that other one. And this one I have got all the varnish off of it and got it down to raw wood. And then I've taken and saturated it with 2 coats of epoxy, and all the edges and everything, and the surface of it and all. Some of the patches will show a little bit, but not too bad, because most of them is going to be underneath the berth and inside of a cabinet. So there really won't be much of this panel showing. But this panel is not rotten, but it had a lot of screws and bolts and stuff in it where it came off of the old icebox cabinet there. So I just filled in with epoxy all the holes and stuff. And like I said, the majority of that will be hidden, and I may end up painting the panel anyway. But that said, that's what I'm going to use here. But it's a mahogany panel, and it doesn't look like much right now because it's been sanded with 220 grit paper. So it's been roughed up to get all the wax, blush off of it. The way it was put in before, it was glued across the top, and then everywhere else was put in with screws and bolts. And I'm going to put it back in the same way. I'm going to use 5200 adhesive caulking at the top, and then the rest of it will be bolted in. Well, I didn't have a proper slitter tool for my trim router or my router to cut a little groove in the edge of this to put this little black trim back in. That's the trim that was out of the old panel. And then I've still got another piece of it as well that was in the panel that I salvaged here. But you can see it's just a little plastic trim that has a little, let's see if I can get it to focus there. That little center little toothed lip there goes in a groove, like edge banding. And normally you would use like a trim router or a router with a slotting bit in it. But I don't have one, and none of the local stores had one, and I didn't want to take the time to order one. And so I just used my Dremel tool with that in it and just freehanded it, and it worked perfectly fine, but it did make a lot of smoke. Okay, there it is, the one on the starboard side there on the right side installed. Like I say, it's epoxied over with a couple of coats of epoxy and then sanded down, so it's going to look a little discolored because of that. But it is glued in across here and here like it was originally. Originally, I think they had used polyester resin is what it looked like was on it. I had to, prise it out and get it out. What I put it back with is 5200 and some stainless screws to hold it in place. And then it has screws down to here, and then everything below bunk level, it has 3 bolts down here. And I have not put those bolts in yet, so it's just a touch loose at the bottom against that bulkhead flange. And then you'll notice too that it's just ever so slightly lifted off the bottom. That was the way the original one was as well. So that bottom end grain could be above any water a little bit there, running down the hull. But all of the edges of this panel now have been saturated with epoxy, 2 coats, all edges and faces. And then, like I said, I put that little black trim back on to it. This one is not rotten. It looks a little rough, but it's not rotten, but it looks pretty rough. That was where it would have been inside that cabinet and inside that ice box or against the styrofoam. You can see over there, that's glue where there was a piece of styrofoam insulation glued to it. So I'll strip all that off, epoxy it, and epoxy all the edges as well, just to try to make it last another decade or 2. So I'm pleased with that. That's a start. Now the next thing I'll do inside this boat is I'll start mocking up the bunks, the quarter berths here, and I'm gonna probably put a fresh layer of plywood over this whole V-berth area. This is really thin. Surprised how thin it was. These panels. This looks like 1/4 inch, 6 mil or 1/4 inch. And I'm going to probably take all that out. A couple of panels right here that were rotten I got to replace anyway, and I've got to replace a little bit of the edge trim here and here. Down here is good except for right in the corner, so I'm going to take and cut that out and rebuild that with some epoxy, and then I'm going to put a piece of mahogany trim wide enough to just cover that up and just match it on the other side for looks, and then just refinish those panels. They're not rotten except for just this corner for whatever reason right here. Probably the window leaked maybe, or it could have been the chain plates leaked. But anyway, this side, everything was rotten. The other side was not so bad. A lot of work, but like I say, I think the boat's going to be worth it. Looking forward to continuing on this one. I just put some temporary steps here. It was just some steps off of an old bunk bed frame. I just cut and stuck in here temporarily just so I can get in and out of the boat. I don't have the originals. Let's see if I can turn this light around here. There you can see back toward the stern. You can see the old paint line there where the old bunks framing went. And I'll basically just go back in the same spot, except for they'll be longer this way. And again, they used to stop back there. But as you can see where that ladder's at, there's almost no room with that panel that was there. You could just barely get in and out of the bunks, and there was not even enough room really even to sit down, which I just wanted to change that.